the question, first of all, of whether Europe, the haunted character of Europe. I mean, I mean that was my concluding point in citing Celan, and basically comparing myself as a wandering Jew to that Jew who's trying to find, even the possibility of saying "I" to another, wandering through these mountains, which as Jew says, these are not my mountains. I have no name here. I have no language here, and it's not until there is in the course of this walk, this movement, there's a form of remembrance, and that remembrance is about there's the candle of Shabbat, but that is in the context of almost a kind of primal scene where it is a memory of death and murder, right? So, and a 0 degree of community, because remember he says I'm lying there. I haven't read this in a very long time, but I don't care about the others any more than they care about me. And it's not until the remembrance of the sabbatical candle comes to the fore that something starts to take shape and a remembrance occurs. So what I was trying to say at the end there is that in this displaced way of practicing philosophy in this site, I am forced into a kind of remembrance that allows me to gain what might be a kind of dwelling. In other words, confronted with this haunted Europe, I'm thrown back into a remembrance that I can't find in America, even though clearly I need it in some sense in order to find a dwelling. So there's a double haunting. In a certain sense, I'm coming to Europe to find a haunting that I don't have access to in North America. So that's the whole point of the wandering motif that I put there. Now, in relation to I'm trying to. I mean, and you said, certainly that this is horrendous histories, and it's not just Europe. I mean, we look in China, we look in Cambodia. I mean, these are also the European thought, and to some extent guiding these horrendous developments. But at the same time, the way you phrased it, I mean, there are philosophers marching with these states, but I would be hesitant to identify the thought with those acts. So I would I don't want to preserve a purity of thought as opposed to the ontic, disasters, but nevertheless, I think there is something to be retained there. Philosophy does have a quasi-transcendental character, or thought does, and I think that's what makes this so difficult to think. Why in this site would there be a relation to that I don't find as easily elsewhere? Now, the other, I mean, yes, it's true. You meet people. I mean, in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, I mean, you meet people reading philosophy in the most extraordinary contexts. But my experience was in the intellectual communities that I was able to be part of, I simply could not find anything like an intellectual community, that the possibility of this kind of thinking was draining away. And so I'm trying to ask a question here that is a very clumsy question, but it's really to ask, is there some sort of, how can I say this? Is there a socio-political ground to the experience that I'm describing? So in other words, am I responding to something objective in the American intellectual sphere that, that makes it possible to distinguish what's happening in America today from what's happening in Europe? And that's why I was eager to say, I can't believe that we don't find the American corporate logo all over the place here. So I totally agree with you in that respect. But nevertheless, I found my experience in the United States was of an utterly stifling intellectual context. And what in my essay on the humanities, I tried to talk about that in terms of the institutional conditions and some of the things that I experienced. Here, I'm playing with Grenell's ideas. I'm expanding this a little bit, and this goes back to a conversation Vanna and I were having about the place of religion in North America and the importance of Protestant Calvinist thinking versus its dominance there versus different religious configurations here, and the fact that in North America, phenomenology survived in Catholic institutions. Why is that? And this is the point that Vanna was trying to make. So there are some, I would say, there's socio-political conditions to what I'm trying to describe here. So this is why I'm very uneasy about my statement, and I'm not even sure I know what to say, know what to think about what I'm saying. But I'm trying to put together these very sort of broad analyses that Granell is pointing to, and I'm trying to link that with my experience, and just asking, is there perhaps a way of thinking about this that is that takes it beyond the subjective and beyond the, even the tiny little world in which I function as a so-called post-Heideggerian philosopher. So.
Yes, Dr. Fynsk, I have two questions. Would you please help clarify the matter of Heidegger's self-identification with Nazism? And what is your prognosis of the state of philosophy in the United States?
What is my prognosis of the state of philosophy? My experience is it's not doing very well. But I would hope that some of the really interesting, some of the very fertile cross-disciplinary work that's going on, particularly with the sciences in philosophy, but not in this logical analytic sense, but in some of the more venturous scientific thinking in information technology, in media, and even in mathematics, and some of the people that I've been able to encounter through work in complexity, for example. There will be sort of pollinations, there will be interactions which will produce some very interesting philosophical turns. Regarding Heidegger, your question is about his personal identification with Nazism?
Yes, at one point he did identify his philosophical thought as culminating in the person of the Führer, yeah, which is what I would seek some clarification.
Well, certainly identified in the sense that he thought he could be a spiritual Führer, but that lasted, a rather brief time. At least with the one at least that identification. I've tried to describe that. I've tried to think about that at long length elsewhere, and my account of that movement in terms of Heidegger's thought, which is what interests me here, not the biography in this case, is that this is an extraordinary blunder precisely in relation to this problem of thinking the relation between the ontological and the ontic. He thought that he could collapse these at that moment, and well, I would describe it as a blunder.
I mean, you know that Sylvain Lothringer, or Lothringer, whatever, joined our faculty now. The guy who was the editor of Semiotext. This is a small little text which brought French philosophy to the United States. And the interesting part here is actually that many European philosophers, especially of our kind, needed the United States to get an academic reputation back in Europe. So you came back as a European-American philosopher, so to speak, and the power of America, the American way of life, etc., helped you in philosophical ways, even if you are in no way complicit with it, so just opposed to it. But you make out this kind of story.
Well, it's something very different from what I'm talking about, because that amounts to using the relative celebrity status that's attached to such an appointment to advance in a career context or a market context in terms of the marketability of one's thought. That's really quite different from what I'm trying to talk about in terms of this.
It was this
exile.
Celebrity status which allowed Derrida at the end of his life, at least, to talk with Habermas. Habermas for the first time talked with him. So the deconstruction in Europe, in Germany, was totally, as you know, was persona non grata. verboten, right? Even better.